and a failure of the local officials to relieve. And I think at the same time, if you're talking about the centre, you've got to think that in 1898, for example, the centre is completely obsessed by foreign invasion. You've got the Germans taking Jiaozhou Bay in 1897, the Russians in Lushun in 1897, French troops occupying Guangzhou Bay 1898. Plus, you have as well a sort of, below that, you've got an internal problem in the sense that the Guangxu Emperor is trying to reform China, trying a desperate sort of last-minute attempt to make China a more modern state, and he's being opposed by conservative forces. So the central government has got its eye off drought relief, local government officials have got their eyes off drought relief and the maintenance of the dikes of the Yellow River, and this causes massive landlessness. You get bands of young men, they can't eat, they can't work on the fields because the harvest has failed and there's this terrible drought. And it's a very, very typical story from China's history. You get this endless cycle of dynastic decline, which, in a sense, creates landlessness, roving bands of young men.
Can we just get some idea, Francis, of the size of Shandong province and how many people are involved here? As I understand it, the Chinese population has gone up from 100 million in around 1600 to about, what we talked about, is up to 400 million. That in itself was causing problems. But how many people are involved? What size is this province? If we can use the UK, is it the size of Wales? If this is the size of Yorkshire, what size is it? And what strength has it got in terms of population?
I'm absolutely hopeless on things like sizes. I mean, I would have thought, 100 Yorkshires possibly. And I mean, at least 2 million people were directly affected by the flood of the Yellow River. So, I mean, when you talk about China and people suffering, it always is in millions. And it's true that there is a kind of drift of the landless towards the north, which is quite significant. Shandong province is the province that kind of sticks out into the sea, just below the province in which we find Beijing and Tianjin. So it's quite crucial because, in a sense, the Boxers originate in Shandong, but the movement is northwards towards Peking and Tianjin.
So when you say these young men, they begin to congregate, it's desperation that's the uprising, it's starvation almost. It's where are we going to get something to eat, what are we going to do about it? And they turn their forces outwards and they go on a path of destruction.
That's right. I mean, I think saying a path of destruction, it's grouping together. I suppose it's finding kind of like-minded people, and also the hope of salvation. The idea that through boxing, through martial arts, and through gaining special spiritual powers, you'll be able to overcome the natural disasters.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about how they came to be as a group, the Boxers? People can imagine unrest and that. But why did they cluster together? Why did they cohere into not so much a unit, but this movement which had this name and then wrought a great deal of havoc around the place?
The thing to bear in mind is that when we use the term boxer in English, we of course have in mind people with boxing gloves in a ring, and that's not at all what's going on in China in the late 19th century. What the term boxer translates is a term which in Chinese is translated something a little bit more like righteous and harmonious fists, but it's the fists of the traditional Chinese martial arts, movements of the arms and the limbs through the air. And this is part of a much longer religious tradition. That's really the way in which we need to understand who the boxers are. Over the centuries, as Francis was saying, there has been over and over again, at times of crisis, a religious impulse in Chinese society to try and band together and find some sort of supernatural way through the crisis. Just 100 years or so, perhaps a little more than that, before the Boxer Uprising, you have an uprising called the White Lotus, for instance, in central China, which has a Buddhist inspiration. Now, there isn't necessarily a direct link between that uprising and the Boxers, but that tradition of religious uprising is very much there in the minds of these young people, carried on through folk tradition. And so in a sense it's a way of trying to find a sort of supernatural religious solution to a real life immediate crisis.
But they became a force, and I'm just wanting our listeners to know how they became a force, who organised them, what sort of force they were. They don't seem to have had any specific political leaders, and that's one distinguishing factor. Did they have a policy? Did they meet in certain places? Did they make certain decisions? Just can you tell us about how these young, starving young men became the Boxers that we know about?
One of the things that does indeed make the Boxers unusual is that there is never any one single leader who you can identify as being the guy who leads the Boxers. Instead, what happens is that they rally around a cause. What they see is the natural disasters around them. And one of the reasons that they find for this, at least in their own minds, is the increasing encroachment of Christianity. And I know we'll probably talk about that later, so I won't go into details on that. But we have to be aware that there is this clash occurring in the countryside between the spread of Christianity and the more indigenous traditional religious beliefs. And that means these young men, many of whom who hear rumours, ideas that are spread through market towns and so forth when they're going up to buy things or trade in this increasingly desperate situation, hear all sorts of often untrue but very powerful rumours about what the foreigners, what the Christians are doing, that enable them to come back to their home villages and say, look, there's this political crisis out there, there are these strange foreign forces, and the only way in which we can fight back is by using these traditional religious martial art techniques and gathering ourselves together to say no and fight back. So in a sense, it's coming from the bottom up, and that's why you don't see any one particular leader.
But I have, in reading for the programme, it was the last major war in which magic was used. Now, can you develop that? What does that mean?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that it's hard to think after this occasion, the Boxer Uprising, 1898-1900, of a major campaign, a major war in China, and there are many after this, of course, in which one side seriously believes in the supernatural, in magic, as a powerful weapon against the enemy. And it's clear that this was central to the Boxer message.
What they did, more specific.
Yeah, what they did was to turn up in these villages, and let's be aware these are people who look very distinctive. They're wearing bright red, bright yellow turbans, sashes. I mean, there's a lot of showmanship going on here. And what they say is that if you follow the spells, the enchantments that we're advocating, then you can do several things. First of all, you can be invulnerable to bullets, to weapons, to anything that anyone may use to attack you. And also you'll become possessed by the supernatural spirits, the otherworldly spirits, which will give you this infinite power that we offer to you. So essentially...
Ancestors and ghosts.
Ancestors and ghosts, absolutely. I mean, it's drawn very much from traditional Chinese religion, but being used, as I say, in a sense, for the last time, as at least a message of potency against this very new, sinister threat of foreign influence. So it's, the modern world comes up against magic, as I say, almost for the first and last time in Chinese history.
Is the magic all trickery? We hear of them proving that they're invulnerable to bullets by firing what turn out to be blanks at their people and saying, look, they don't get mowed down by these bullets and so on. Is there a lot of fairground trickery going on with the magic?
It's a combination of things. It's not fair, I think, just to call it fairground trickery. Obviously, some of what's going on is a sleight of hand, as you mentioned. But there's a genuine confidence. The kind of, the millions of people that you get who are coming behind this movement couldn't be called up if there wasn't some greater message that really struck a chord. And of course, the Boxers had a ready-made excuse when it didn't work, as it often did, which was they said, well, there's ritual pollution going on. Menstruating women is just one example of the phenomena which the Boxer leaders at the local level would say must have occurred if the bullets did in fact hit their target.
Or eating garlic.
Or eating garlic, for example.
And Gary Tiedemann, Christianity has been mentioned and ironic, and it was a big factor. The missionaries had moved in and they were spreading out of China. They were in the villages. They had quite a lot of power. They made decisions. They decided who won in law cases, and increasingly the Christians did if the Christians were making the decisions, and they would not fit in. The Christian religion wouldn't fit in. The other, Confucianism, Taoism and Buddhism tended to meld, but Christianity said, no, we are the only ones and you must reject all the others. So there was an intellectual frisson there. Can you tell us how this played in the Shandong province, how this became the object of attack?
First of all, I would like to say that it was not maybe primarily a Shandong problem. The way Christianity developed, it goes back at least 300 years, filtering down from Beijing into Zhili province, the metropolitan province next to Shandong. And I see it more as a border problem between these two provinces. So at the beginning of the 18th century, we see the emergence of Catholic communities. These are Catholics. There were later on, towards the end of the 19th century, a few Protestants in the Boxer area as well, but it's mainly a Catholic problem. And they had created their own Catholic villages, you could say, here and there, scattered in the remoter parts of the country. What changes this approach are the so-called unequal treaties of the mid-19th century, especially the one of 1860, the Beijing Convention, the French version of the Beijing Convention, where a missionary and a French government translator in search